Warning: this guide features strats for P12S that may differ from the ones most common in PF in your region. Namely, this guide follows very closely to the Pastebin strats common in North American Party Finder. If you're in EU and are looking to do this fight in Party Finder, you can use this guide to understand the mechanics, but you should check out Rinon's guide for the common EU PF strats. I'll post a link in the description. Hi guys, and welcome to a Hector Lecture guide to the fight P12S Phase 2. This is Pallas Athena. Before the fight begins, you're going to need spread positions. These should be the same as the ones that you did in Phase 1, but the most important thing is that tanks and melees are north and healers and ranged are south. These can easily be adapted into vertical line spreads and horizontal line spreads that we're going to need throughout the fight. For both the vertical and horizontal spreads, tanks and healers being middle is the standard. You're also going to need what are called Q spreads, so named because you're spread in what kind of looks like the letter Q. The only thing that really matters for this is that the ranged are in the positions they are here, that you've got a ranged player in the bottom right spots, and your most mobile player, preferably your physical ranged, in the middle position. The fight begins with a raid mod Ultima. Make sure to heal and mitigate through this. This is followed up by Palladian Grass. This is a tank buster that's going to hit 2 times on the top player in aggro. You can swap in between the 2 hits if you like. It is a very unique cleave in that whichever side of the arena the tank is on, either the west or the east, that entire half of the arena will be cleaved. The first hit gives a physical vuln, so you either need to swap during the cast so that the off tank takes the second hit, or preferably just have your tank take both hits with an invuln. There's only 2 of these in the entire fight, so you can have one tank invuln one and one tank invuln the other, or if you've got a warrior, they can just invuln both of them. Afterwards, Gaiochos is going to be cast. Everybody needs to be in. When this goes off, this is going to hit for very high raid-wide shared damage. So if more players are dead, then it's more damage for the alive players. Make sure you're inside of the circle. The screen will blur, and when it reappears, you'll see that most of the stage is gone. The arena has shrunk, and so too have the players. The entire time that you're like this, your movement is slowed unless you're popping sprint or other movement-enhancing abilities. The boss will next cast Summon Darkness and summon 3 angels. These are going to shoot off lasers shortly. Their positions is semi-random, but the idea is that they're always going to leave one set of cardinals or intercardinals completely safe. In this case, east-west are the safe spots. We're going to have all supports chained to DPS in just a second, and so supports and DPS each need to go to a different safe spot. There's a lot of different ways you can assign these positions, but one common way is to just have fixed spots. So supports always go to one of these spots, and DPS always go to one of these spots. The safe spots will always be opposite each other, so this works out nicely. In this case, the supports are going to go west, and the DPS are going to go east. Wait until you get this chain debuff before you start to move, as this is when the chains are fixed, and you can actually stretch them. If you move early, you won't be able to break them in time. Wait for the lasers to go off, and then head back to middle and get into your spread positions. The boss will cast Demi-Parhelion, and you're going to get a set of AoEs that are always the same. Now the boss will cast Geocentrism and show one of 3 visual tells with tentacles. This pattern here is going to make the arena get spin vertically, so the only safe spots are going to be the vertical lines in between the AoEs. The group's going to go into their vertical spreads in these positions. If you're struggling to notice if this is what you have, you probably have the vertical lines and you're just not able to see the tentacle because from a lot of camera angles it's hard to see this one. Make sure that you're spread out. The spreads are very small, so as long as you're not stacked directly on top of another player, you probably won't clip. One of the other geocentrism patterns you could have had is this one here, with a tentacle going horizontally over the arena. This is hinting that you need to be spread into horizontal lines. Spread out, wait for the arena AoEs to appear, and you're done. The final geocentrism pattern looks like this, with tentacles wrapping around the side. The boss is about to spin the arena around, basically. As long as you're nice and tight in your spread positions, you don't need to move from here. You're sorted, as it's a donut, requiring you to be quite near to the middle. The boss will finish off with an Ultima Raid-wide, and then the stage will return to normal. The next mechanic is the classical concepts. Before this is cast, you want to loosely spread out. I've exaggerated these spreads just for the purpose of this guide. When the stage unblurs, you're going to see that every player has either an alpha or a beta debuff. They have a PlayStation symbol above their head, and we've got a ton of different shapes on the arena. So let's break this down. First off, the whole idea is that the red pyramids and the yellow cubes are going to try to tether to the blue shape. The nearest blue shape will pull them in, and if they manage to tether to it, they will explode, wiping the raid. The only way to stop this is to have a player intercept these shapes. Alpha debuff players are capable of intercepting the red pyramid, and beta debuff players are capable of intercepting the yellow cube. If you're nearer than the blue shape, they'll tether you instead, and the tethers will fall off relatively harmlessly with a small attack. You still need to dodge away at the end, as they'll explode, but it's only a small point-blank AoE. Now, for how we deal with the whole mechanic. First off, the PlayStation shapes mean that that's going to be who you are tethered to. These are totally random in their assignment. These players need to be quite near to each other from a few seconds after the shapes appear. To do this in an orderly fashion, most groups will follow BPOG, or blue, purple, orange, green, or X, square, circle, triangle, and all you do is you meet up on top of the blue shape in your lane. You've got a couple of seconds before the green tethers mean that you need to stay near to get to these spots, so you can just hurry there quickly. Once in these positions, now we need to sort out the alpha and beta. Let's look at the DPS player in the north to show how we do this. The alpha debuff player is going to slide slightly closer towards the red shape, still staying near to the blue shape so we don't stretch our green tether. The beta player needs to go near to a yellow shape, but you might see a problem here. There are two shapes next to them. How do they know which one to go to? There's a lot of different patterns to this, and so there's a lot of complicated ways to work it out. Instead of trying to memorize it, my trick is this. Look at one of the shapes next to you that's the right type. If that shape has another blue symbol next to it, it's the wrong one for you. Go to the other one. This is only the case if you have two shapes to choose between. Let's take a look at another group example. Let's look at the tank and the healer on the west side of the arena. The tank has it easy. There's only one yellow shape to go to, so they slide towards that one. But the alpha player, the healer, has two red shapes to choose from. One of the red shapes is next to another blue shape, so that's the wrong one. They go to the other red shape. If you follow this, what will happen is that every single player is going to be in position to intercept each of the shapes, and so as a group, none of the shapes will be able to tether to a blue shape. They're all going to instead tether to a player. Wait till the tethers appear, and when they fall off, so do the tethers that are keeping you attached to the other player. Dodge the point-blank AoEs from each of the shapes. The boss will start to cast Palladian Ray. After the point-blank AoEs go off, we now need to bait cleaves from two tentacles that are going to strike at where the 3 and the 4 waymark are. You can YOLO this if you want to, but one way that you can make this consistent is to have the alpha players always stand on a northern corner of the waymark, the beta players on the southern corner of the waymark, and you use the lane that you started in to know where to go. So from left to right, these are the X, the square, the circle, and the triangle players, just like we did originally. Wait for the tentacles to drop, and as soon as the initial cleave hits, dodge out of it. It doesn't matter where you dodge for this one, you just need to not get hit by a second hit of the cleave. After this is over, you get another Ultima Raid Wide, and then a new tank buster, Crush Helm. This will target the top two players in aggro, first for 4 hits of an attack that give you a stacking physical foam debuff that needs to be Asuna'd before the 5th hit hits immediately afterwards for heavy damage. In general, you want H1 to Asuna main tank and H2 to Asuna elf tank, and if you're a bard, then use that cool ability you've got to help out and make your healers and your tanks like you. Next up is Caloric Theory. When Caloric Theory cast starts, you're going to get this blue line grid appearing, and a random support and a random DPS will get a beacon above their head. There are a lot of different ways to solve this, but what I'm going to show is the Papan or Papan Strat for dealing with it. In this one, whichever support gets the beacon goes towards the D waymark, and whichever DPS gets the beacon goes towards the B waymark. When they move there, they want to stand on the inside of the waymark. They're role partner, so if you are a healer, then the other healer, and if it's a melee, then the other melee, is going to go to A and C. Everyone else is going to stack perfectly middle in the arena. The reason we're positioned like this at the start is because one of the beacon players will randomly get a shared damage stack, and we need them to be near enough to the middle players to share that. If they take it by themselves, they'll die. When the screen unfades, you'll get a lot of debuffs, so let's break these down one by one. This fiery debuff here is just a 2-person stack. You need to share it with another player, somebody who doesn't also have a stack. The green arrow debuff is just a big point-blank AoE that's going to target the players at the end of the mechanic. It just means at the very end you need to be spread away if you have this debuff. The important one, though, is this. The caloric debuff is a stacking debuff that increases over the course of the mechanic. If you ever get to 5 stacks, it's a wipe. Things that increase stacks are if you get hit by any ability using fire, like those 2-person fire stacks, or if you move 9 yalms. For reference, that is roughly 2 of the blue line tiles vertically, or a little bit more than 1 of the tiles diagonally. Over the course of the mechanic, no player is allowed to move more than one of these sets of distances, so if you ever move 10 yoms, you will eventually get 5 stacks and the group will wipe. This strat is built around making sure no one ever has to move further than that. Our first priority is to get into groups of 2, one fire stack person and one arrow stack to sort out the fire 2-person stacks. We need to do this tactically because if you go to the wrong position and then adjust afterwards, you're going to get too many caloric stacks by the end and it's going to be a wipe. One way of doing this is for the middle players to move out by having Group 1 always look west and then counterclockwise to find a spot to go to, Group 2 look north and then clockwise to find a spot to. To do this, we also have supports move first and DPS move second, as we'll always have 2 supports and 2 DPS middle. In this case here, we have tanks and range middle. Our tanks are moving first. The way to do this is to look at your own debuff bar to figure out, am I fire or am I arrow, and then look at the fires above the player's head to work out what they have, as any player with a fire stack has a fiery symbol above their head. So for main tank, they look at their debuff, see that their arrow, they're looking for a fire to stack with. Following their priority, the first player to do that is H1 in the south, so that's where they're going to head. Off tank, instead, has a fire stack debuff, so they're looking for someone who doesn't have fire above their head. Following the Group 2 priority, M1's the first one, so that's where they're going to move to. They move to the middle of the waymark and stay there. Now the DPS have to move. For the DPS, R1 has an arrow debuff. There's only one fire player who's unpaired yet, it's M2 in the north, so that's where they're going to go to. R2, they've got themselves a fire stack debuff. There's only one unpaired arrow player, so that's where they're going to move to. They move out and then wait. Take your time with this. You have 12 seconds from when the debuffs first appear to get everyone into these groups, and you're barely having to move. The most important thing is to make sure when you move, you go to the right spot. Wait for the debuffs to fall off, and once the fire stacks go off, now we can go on to the second part of this mechanic. For this part, we're dealing with 2 fire stacks because 2 of the fire stack players initially will have refired and gotten their debuff back, and we need to spread out the 4 arrow players. Let's sort out the arrow players first. The east-west arrow players are just going to slide out and stop just before the 1 and the 2 way mark. These players will always have been the players that started with the fiery beacons at the very beginning, and so they can move a little bit further because they haven't moved yet during the mechanic. The other 2 arrow players move north and south out, but they can only go up to the intersection of the blue lines without getting an extra stack of caloric. Finally, we need to do the 2-person fire stacks at east and west on the B and the D way mark. We need the north and the south fire players to rotate. If they can rotate clockwise to make a fire and non-fire pair, then they do. If they can't, they rotate counterclockwise. In this case, clockwise works just fine. I recommend for this one, aim for the inside of the waymark for 2 reasons. 1, you're further away from the arrows, and 2, this minimizes your movement, and these players here actually have the tightest movement check of anyone in Caloric. Wait for the fires and the arrows to go off. And now don't move for a second because you still have Caloric and you don't want to prematurely celebrate, get an extra stack, and wipe after doing the mechanic successfully. Next up is Ekpyrosis. This is always going to be a combination of 2 proximity markers and 4 exaflares. This is one of 2 patterns that you may see. For this pattern, we need to dodge the proximity markers first by splitting east-west. We're going to have Group 1 go west and Group 2 go east. You go as near to middle as you can while dodging an exaflare and hugging the wall. As soon as the first exaflare and the proximities go off, you need to start spreading along the wall. You can use your usual vertical spread positions. Just before the 3rd exaflare, the spreads will go off. And now to dodge the rest of the exaflares, an easy way to do this is when the first exaflare symbols appear, try to memorize where one of them near your spread spot is, and go to the middle of that afterwards. This will always be a safe spot for exaflares. Ultima will get cast as a raid wide, so make sure you run middle as soon as you can to mitigate, heal up, ready for this. The other possible Ekpyrosis pattern you could have had looks like this. In this case, the proximity markers are going to appear east and west, and now you have diagonal exaflares. They're kind of weird. Very similar strategy for this. This time we split north-south, with tank melees going north and healer's range going south. Again, hug near middle, but dodging the exaflare on the wall. After the first explosion, start to spread out along the wall. Spreads go off before the 3rd exaflare. And now try to dodge back to where an initial exaflare was, and wait there. You can try to dodge in middle earlier, but you need to feel confident you won't get hit by an exaflare. Heal up for the Ultima, and that's Ekpyrosis. Next mechanic, Pangenesis, is complicated. Before the mechanic even starts, you want to have a conga line agreed. The order of this does not matter, with one exception. There's going to be a tank buster, one of the Palladian Grasps one, where the hit hits both times on the same side. You want to invuln this preferably, so whichever tank is going to invuln it should be on the far right for this. When Pangenesis goes off, you get big, heavy, shared raid-wide damage, and a ton of debuffs. Let's break things down. First, this debuff here is Unstable Factor. Some players have 0 stacks of it, some players have 1 stack of it, and some players have 2 stacks of it. If when the timer runs out for this, if you still have a stack of it, it's a wipe. So we need to tactically get rid of stacks of this. You do this by merging with other players. You cannot merge while you still have this debuff here, but it falls off fairly early on in the mechanic, and so we can basically ignore it. Merging is done very similar to P8S Phase 2. You stay kind of near to the player, wait for a couple seconds, and you'll hear a nice little sound to say you've merged. If the 2 merging players have a different number of stacks of Unstable Factor, then what happens is the player with the higher number of stacks loses 1. So in this case, the top left group, the 1 is going to drop down to nothing, and the 2s in the other groups are going to drop down to a 1. Usually this results in you getting a critical factor debuff the first time that you lose a stack, and spawning a slime underneath you. This doesn't happen when the 2 and the 0 merge. To be honest, it's a little bit confusing as to why this doesn't happen. It doesn't seem to really match with the description on the text for the debuff, and a lot of people theorize it might be a bug. Either way, don't worry about it, it won't matter for the mechanic. At the end of the mechanic, the slimes are going to try to tether towards players. Any player with a critical factor cannot take these tethers or they'll die, so these are always taken by the players that started with 0 stacks of the unstable factor. They pick up the tethers, and they take them far away from the group as they hit with a giant explosion when they go off. The rest of Pangenesis is dealing with Pantheos. This is just a set of light and dark towers. These towers always take 2 players to soak. 1 player needs an opposite colored debuff, and the other one doesn't need a debuff. It doesn't matter. The first set of towers will always be a light tower and a dark tower, but it's random which one will appear on which side. The second set of towers, though, is fixed from this point onwards. The northern tower in each set is going to be opposite of the one next to it, and the southern tower will be the same color as the original one. The final set of towers are exactly the same as the second set, just move slightly more towards middle. The way that we soak these is in a very specific pattern based off our debuffs. What I'm about to show is what's called the 2-0 pattern. There's another one called 2-1, but I find the 2-0 easier, so it's what I'm showing. For 2-0, the 0 player, the one that doesn't have an unstable factor debuff, is always going to hop in the first tower, alongside the short 2. By short, if you look at the light and dark debuffs, you'll see that 2 of them have a 16-second timer, and 2 of them start with a 20-second timer. Short timer is the 16-second, so in this case, the healers. For the second set of towers, the first set of tower players are just going to hop in the northern tower always, and the 1 and the long 2 will take the southern set of towers. Finally, for the third one, you need to look at your debuff. When you soak a tower, 1 player randomly will be given a matching debuff, so light tower gives you a light debuff, and the other player gets nothing. For the second to the third set, if you're given a debuff, you move diagonally and you swap to the opposite colored tower. If you don't get a debuff, you just move horizontally across into the next tower. Here's how it all looks when you do the mechanic from start to finish. First, as soon as the debuffs appear, our conga line is useful because we can have the 0 player step forward, the 1 player step backwards, and this allows them to see where they are relative to the other one and assign sides. The leftmost player goes left, the rightmost player goes right. They can immediately position for the first tower that they will take based off their debuff. The 2s all squish towards middle, wait for Pantheos to cast, and then need to look at where the first towers spawn. Since we have light on the left, both dark players will go that way, and both light players will go opposite towards the right. The short debuff players immediately hop in the tower, and they'll start to merge with the 0 player while waiting in the tower. The other 2 players just hang out to the side. They can merge or not merge, it doesn't matter. The first tower gets soaked, and now all that happens is we wait a second for the merge to take place, and we move into the second tower. Second towers are fixed again. The first tower players go north, the other players are in the south one. After the towers are soaked, wait a second, because you need to make sure that you merge, and you should see a slime spawn. For the third set of towers, this is where you look at if you got a dark or light debuff a second ago. If you didn't get a debuff, they just slide horizontally across, hop in the tower. If you did get a debuff, you need to move diagonally opposite. This will work out perfectly in that you're always going to have a 1 and a 0 together, so all of the unstable factor debuffs should fall off. You'll also get 2 more slimes as 2 players didn't have critical factor yet. At the very end, have every player go down to the south, but the 2 0 stack players are going to be the ones that wait a little bit more north on their side. When the tethers appear, they need to pick up these tethers. They need to pick up exactly 3 because these slimes, in addition to targeting them for a big AoE damage, also give a stack of 4-fold come ruin. If you take 4, you get doom, you die, so they can only take exactly 3. These players should go to these exact positions here, with the far left player being slightly south of the into the second tile, and the northern player being just a step to the right. This is because Palladian Grasp is going to go off almost immediately after the slime explosions. And so we have everybody far enough away, max melee works south, so that they don't get clipped by the slimes. But everybody's already on the left, except for R1, who can just take a quick step to the side. I strongly recommend having one of your tanks involved in this tank buster to make it a lot simpler. After this is the Classical Concepts 2. At the start, everything is exactly the same as Classical Concepts 1. PlayStation shapes, the same alpha and beta, you resolve it exactly the same way. BPOG or X square circle triangle. Wait for your tethers to appear. Alpha goes towards the red shape, beta goes towards the yellow shape. The twist for Classical 2 is Pantaray. What Pantaray is about to do is take all of those shapes and rotate them 180 degrees. This can be kind of complicated because the shapes are going to disappear and reappear in their new pattern and almost immediately tether, so you have to pre-move and predict where those shapes are going to end up. If you're not already in the right spot when the new shapes appear, it's too late and it's going to be a wipe. There is an easy solution to do this if you, like me, you can't solve this in your head. Namely, go to your original spot, face your camera perfectly towards middle, and press W, or move the joystick forward in my case. The way that this works is this is going to allow you to perfectly mirror your position to where the new spot needs to be. There's a macro that I'll try to link in the description that can help you to see and understand this, but it just takes a couple of practice. You are just going straight through middle to the newly mirrored spot. Once you're certain you know your spot, use the start of the cast of Pantaray as sort of a go button. As soon as it starts to be cast, both you and your partner are going to very carefully move towards your new spot, making sure not to get too far apart from each other while you do this. If you're in your new spot in time, the new shapes appear, they tether towards the players, and everything is fine. One last little twist here is Palladian Ray is going to be cast before the circle explosions go off, and so we need to bait the cleaves first. If you're doing my fixed versions with Alpha North, Beta South, and then you're using lanes, just be aware that because we've mirrored with Pantaray, this is the lane that you're going to be in to bait your cleaves. Position to bait these cleaves. Some people do these on shapes instead of on the corners. It's whatever works for you, but make sure that you do not bait them directly north and south, because you want to be able to dodge to those spots to deal with the explosions from the shapes afterwards. There's an Ultima Raid Wide, another Crush Helm Tank Buster, and now we get a second Caloric Theory. 7 players are targeted with these green arrow markers, and 1 player with a fireway mark. First, get into your Q spread positions. Using the grid that's now appeared to make sure you're in the exact right spot, you should be on the intersection of blue lines. Secondly, you need the fire player to be middle, so have whoever your middle player is swap with their position. If everybody's positioned like this, when the cast goes off, everyone has a point-blank AoE but should miss everyone else. Big damage. And now we get more debuffs. Don't worry, this is simpler than Caloric 1. We still have the Caloric debuff, it's still the stacks. Reminder, you can only move 9 Yoms. There's not going to be any fire attacks, so this time, because most players start with 2 stacks, you're going to be able to move 2 of the 9 Yom distance. So one move is either a little over 2 tiles north or 1 tile diagonally. You can do that twice over the course of the mechanic. At the very end, everybody's hit with an arrow, so at the very end, everyone needs to be spread. And the new one is this Entropification debuff. All this does is the player that's targeted with this has the fire symbol above their head, so it's M1. From time to time, it loses a stack and drops a giant puddle. Now, if M1 had free movement, they could just wiggle left and right, and they could dodge all the stacks themselves, but because of the limited movement, there's a trick to be able to resolve this. You can pass this debuff. So the first player is going to dodge their puddle by rotating into the next player clockwise. This will pass the debuff to that player. A new puddle will appear underneath it, that's the next stack, and now all that happens is each time we play Hot Potato. If you just were given the debuff, you rotate clockwise to pass the debuff. If you've already passed the debuff, you're dodging away from the group just outside of the puddle. It doesn't matter exactly where you dodge out, but try to go away from the group, and you want to aim for the intersection of blue lines because that'll be a perfect distance to have moved. The next puddle appears, and we rotate while off-tank dodges. Next puddle, rotate, dodge, and you just keep going. Doesn't matter where the fire starts, it will never start middle, it will always start on one of the arrow players initially. Now, here's where things differ a little bit. Some early strats will have it where this final rotation has R1 move towards the middle player, and then they both dodge the puddle together. There is no point in doing this. R1 is perfectly fine to just rotate to where the first player started and dodge the puddle by themselves. This means that the middle player actually just gets to sit still for the entirety of the mechanic. Make sure that you've dodged to an intersection. Everybody should be spread out well enough that the arrows go off. And reminder, wait a second before you move so you don't get too many stacks of Caloric. There's another Ekpyrosis. This is random whether or not it's going to be the same pattern as earlier or the opposite. Deal with it the same way you did before. It's followed by an Ultima, so make sure that you hurry back middle after the Exaflares. And now we're going to get the second Gaiochos. Heal up, mitigate, and dodge towards middle before everyone gets shrunk down. We're almost there. Stack perfectly middle, as the boss will cast Summon Darkness, but this time only spawning one ad. This ad's going to shoot a laser that we need to dodge, and we're going to dodge perpendicularly to it, so 90 degrees left and right. You can either do this ad relative, where one group goes left and one goes right, but I prefer to stick to the same map relative positions we used before, so the supports will go north, the DPS will go south. The boss will, as a twist, now cast Demi-Parhelion. We're going to get those same AoEs, and now we're going to get either horizontal or vertical lines shown while dealing with the rest of this. Wait for the Q. In this case, it's going to be the vertical line tell. And what we'll do is we'll try to dodge near the positions I showed earlier, so 90 degrees away from the ad, but aiming towards the safe spot for the geocentrism, in this case, vertical lines. Wait for the debuff to appear. Move in your respective positions. You should break your chains, and now we have spreads to deal with. You can start to spread off the wall, but don't go into the laser, which goes off, and now you can spread fully. For these spread positions, I just have the tanks and melees moving further than the healers in ranged, in the order main tank, off tank, H1, H2, and same for melees, but whatever you do works fine. All that's left is now the soft Enrage. Summon Darkness will spawn 8 ads. These are going to randomly tether to either all DPS or all tank healers. These players need to stretch the tether perfectly through the middle of the arena, and the other players, their partner, are going to stand in front of them. For these partners, we just have tanks partnered with their melee, healers partnered with the range, the same as we did in Phase 1. Stretch the tethers out, have the other player in front of it. After the laser, heal up, mitigate, and immediately go middle to make it easier for your healers to top you up because there's an Ultima raid-wide. When it's finished, the other 4 players will be tethered. Now it's all the tank healers. They stretch their tethers, and the DPS stands in front of them. Wait for the lasers, and then go middle to heal up for another Ultima raid-wide. This is 20 seconds of intense damage, so make sure to plan out your mitigation accordingly. When all is done, all that's left is the Enrage cast. Ignorabimus. I do not think I pronounced that correct. You've got a little bit of time as the boss has giant tentacles wrap around the arena and start to squish it, which will cause it to crack and crumble. You need to kill the boss before this cast finishes, otherwise you will literally be hugged to death. That's it. That's everything you need to know for P12S Phase 2. I hope you've enjoyed my guides for this tier and found them useful. Thanks for watching. Take care.